What's up, everybody? A Left at Wall update. Left at Wall is now available on Tubi. What does that mean? That means you get to watch it for free. I know there's so many streaming services out there, so many monthly fees, that sometimes renting or buying something just seems like a pain and yet another expense. Well, now it's available free. If you're not already using Tubi, I highly recommend it. You can get it on your smart TV, or you can just watch it online on your computer. Just type in Left at Wall movie, and the Tubi link should come up as one of the available ways to watch it. So if you haven't watched it yet, come on. Now you've got to. Left at Wall on Tubi. Episode 123. Ramsey Kanaan. Ramsey Kanaan is a musician, anarchist, and publisher. He is the founder of AK Press and later PM Press. I've been a fan of PM Press for many years. I highly recommend diving into their catalog if you're not already familiar. It's one of the best out there. They've tabled at some of our events over the years. Please welcome to the show, Ramsey Kanaan. Ramsey Kanaan, how are you?
I'm very well. Thanks very much. And thanks for joining with me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I'm real excited to talk to you. I've been a fan of what you do for many years now, and looking forward to diving into that. But I want to start at the beginning, like I always do. So, where are you from?
Well, that's one of those weird questions of depending how you want to be answered. But the reason I have a funny voice is that I grew up in Scotland. My family moved there when I was 5. The reason I have a funny name is because my family are Lebanese. That's as good as it gets.
So is Scotland your kind of earliest memories of childhood, or?
No, I mean I was actually born in England.
Okay.
So and my family moved around quite a lot when I was young, but I lived in Brighton for 4 years. I wasn't born in Brighton. Brighton being on the Sussex coast of the UK, so I have memories of getting my face smashed in on Brighton Beach, not by mods or rockers, but Brighton Beach is a pebble beach. It's a stone beach, not a sand beach. Okay. I remember as a little kid, some other kids throwing a stone and it hit me in the mouth and burst my lip.
Why?
I have no idea. Oh, I think probably just they were kids playing. You know what I mean? That's the kind of thing kids do, is throw stones, I suppose.
Yeah. Being
on a stony beach, what else are you going to do? But anyway, so yeah, I have some memories of childhood. But yeah, I grew up in Scotland, meaning all of my schooling, I guess, all of my education was in Scotland.
What part?
I grew up in a small town called Stirling, which is in central Scotland. Mm. It's largely known because it has a castle, and it's also the site of many of Scotland's supposedly nationalist battles, the Battle of Bannockburn and the Battle of Stirling Bridge. So all the internecine warfare amongst the nobles, which has been, in these days, is parlayed into great Scottish nationalism. You know, William Wallace and Robert the Bruce and all that kind of crap.
Yeah. So what, as someone who's not super familiar, I mean, I've seen Braveheart, but like...
Exactly. So Braveheart is complete fiction.
Uh-huh.
The only part they get correct is that Mel Gibson, the stumpy dwarf, I think William Wallace in real life was actually a very large gentleman. I think he was like 6'6", and his sword is in the Wallace Monument. I think his sword weighs, something ridiculous, like 200 pounds or whatever. He was a large gentleman. And pretty much the only accurate thing in Braveheart is that, because I say it was basically a bunch of internecine warfare amongst the ruling class, he did actually fight Robert the Bruce. What's not mentioned, well, all kinds of things are fiction, but what's not mentioned is that, because these are Robert the Bruce and William Wallace, the two great heroes, I say, of Scottish nationalism or whatever, is that neither of them were Scottish.
Oh, really? So I didn't know that.
And the reason that Robert the Bruce changed sides, I mean, Robert the Bruce was actually French. I think William Wallace was English. But again, it doesn't really matter because I say it's just, as I say, this kind of the nobles and the ruling class are kind of warring amongst themselves. So Scottish nationalism is an excuse to further the interests of certain sectors of the ruling class. Hence, they change sides. Hence, they fight against each other. Hence, they switch allegiance. Whatever.
Well, I guess this kind of came up nationally. I'll ask you this just out of pure curiosity, and then I want to get back to your timeline. But do you support independence?
That's a complicated question.
I know because
but I say, do I support independence? I typically do not support independence as a good anarchist. The workers of the world have no country, so I don't actually believe in nationalism or independence. In the case of Scotland, do I support Scottish nationalism? Absolutely not. The folks that present themselves as the would-be rulers of an independent Scotland are just as bad as the current rulers of the United Kingdom or Great Britain or whatever. However, in the case of Scotland, Britain, of course, is one of certainly in relatively modern history, is one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. And Britain still owns a large chunk of the world or rules it in various ways. So I think the breakup of the UK would be a fantastic thing. So if an independent Scotland would add to the breakup of the UK, I would support it. However, the last time there was a referendum, the Scottish Nationalist Party, which I think is now the biggest party in Scotland, they campaigned on several planks. One is that they would remain in NATO. So all the American military bases, America has more military bases in Scotland than any other per square inch than any other place in the world. All of America's nuclear armaments are based in Scotland. America's Trident submarines are based in Scotland because, of course, it's a lot closer to the Russia than America is. So the Scottish nationalists campaigned on A, they would remain in NATO. So Scotland would have the same horrendous foreign policy. B, they would keep the fucking Queen. So the Queen would still be the head of Scotland. Thirdly, they would remain in the EU. And there's also lots of controversy about Brexit in the EU and all that kind of stuff. But let's recall that the EU is the economic union. It was set up under neoliberalism and it benefits, capitalism. Being the EU is and all the lefties opposed being in the EU for those reasons. And most of them still do. So, the party campaigned that they would remain in the EU and they would keep the UK pound sterling as the currency, i.e., they would keep the same economic policies. So, in effect, all they were claiming that would change was that we'd have yet another set of fucking passports and border controls. Since the foreign policy and the economic policy were going to remain the same. So, in those circumstances, do I support Scottish nationalism? No, of course not. Why would I? But, if an independent Scotland would actually contribute to the breaking up of the UK, of Great Britain, then sure, why not? So yes, I'd support it.
Yeah, no, I get it
in strategic ways, I guess,
yeah,
but not out of that reflexive nationalism. Again,
No, I know it was a very complicated thing I just brought up, but yeah, I was very curious your take on it.
But no, I get asked that question a lot.
I'd imagine, yeah,
unsurprisingly,
yeah, no, totally. So, well, let's get back to a little more just basics on your timeline then. So when did you start kind of leaning into radical politics? Like, what got you into that as you were growing up?
I'm not sure. Meaning my My parents were not political.
Okay.
They weren't politically active. And when there wasn't a lot of politics around the house. Do you know what I mean? So, I grew up, my parents had the daily newspaper. So, I read the newspaper as a kid. But I think most importantly for me, growing up how I understood the world was that I grew up in a house full of books. And my mother particularly. So, as I say, I had a house full of books, so I had a lot of books at hand, and my mother in particular always encouraged me to read, and she dragged me off. I was a member of several libraries, so I think only one of which was in walking distance, so my mother would dutifully take me to these other libraries. In those days, certainly in Scotland, I think you're only allowed 2 or 3 library tickets at a time. You mean you can only take out a couple of books or 3 books. So my voracious reading appetite was circumvented by, being a member of 2 or 3 libraries, so I could have whatever 6 or 7 or 8 library tickets, and so I was a voracious reader, as many little boys are. I was completely obsessed with war as a pre-teenager, and I would read indiscriminately on anything I could get my hands on to do with war, whether it was a biography of Julius Caesar, or Hannibal's Carthage campaigns, or Panzer divisions of the Waffen SS, or whatever the fuck. So I read widely and indiscriminately. My mother, being a smart woman, kept feeding me kind of more sophisticated books on war. So if you really like war, why don't you read Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, or Give Me All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Remarque, and as I say, and was constantly, I was a voracious early reader. So she was feeding me all the kind of classics, all the simpler books to read. So, I read Animal Farm in 1984, and One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Solzhenitsyn, or Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, or whatever, the novels of Camus, A Stranger and all that. And I'm guessing it was by reading this stuff that it kind of turned me on to more. It was through this kind of reading that turned me on to more sophisticated political ideas. Secondly, from about the age of 11, so in 77, 78, I really got into punk rock. And of course, punk rock is explicitly political, if somewhat unsophisticated, shall we say, in its analysis of stuff. And so my interests in, I guess, music and culture and the way the world works all kind of mesh together, I suppose. So meaning by the time I was 13, which was in 1979, I had decided that I was an anarchist, and I had a fairly sophisticated understanding of what anarchism was, meaning I knew that I was an anarchist as opposed to being into the British Labour Party and being a socialist or, whatever. I also remember in 1979, I walked into the local independent record store and I bought a Crass t-shirt, which of course was obviously a bootleg because Crass, like Fugazi, never actually produced t-shirts of their own. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, I bought the t-shirt because it had Anarchy, Peace and Freedom on it. And I thought, that's cool, that's what I'm into. And then, of course, I thought, this is kind of embarrassing if I go to school wearing my Crass t-shirt. People are going to say, oh, Crass, what are they like? And of course, I would have no idea. So I then bought my first Crass record, which was Stations of the Crass.
Well, so what was some of the punk rock you were into?
So,
first?
Strangely enough, my younger brother, I have a brother, I've got 2 brothers, but my younger brother was 2 years my junior. So he'd have been, in 1977, he'd have been 9. That's right, yeah, my arithmetic is correct. Yeah, he'd have been 9. So he was into punk as it happened as a 9-year-old. So he would come home, like he had all the original Sex Pistols ready to come home with like Pretty Vacant and all that stuff. He was into the Sex Pistols, he was into the UK Subs, he was into the Damned. So, whatever kind of was around at the time. And I remember when he came home in 77, like, oh, put on Pretty Vacant and said, listen to this. And I thought, ah, this is crap. Because at that point, I still wasn't really into music at all.
Mm.
But anyway, so it's partly rediscovering his stuff. And then, I kind of dived headlong into it. So
We're into the Clash.
By 78, there's the Clash, Stiff Little Fingers. Britain is very different from America. Well, it's very different from America in all kinds of ways. But punk was both underground but very mainstream at the same time. Meaning that for a 12-year-old growing up in small town Scotland, nevertheless, I still had access to punk rock because it was also mainstream for 3 reasons. One is that the legendary DJ John Peel had a show from 10 to midnight, Monday to Thursday, which we all listened to religiously. And that was on BBC Radio 1. So it was at the last show. And in those days, again, the radio closed at midnight. You know what I mean? There was no radio at all from midnight till like 5 a.m. But nevertheless, John Peel, played punk rock. And because I guess it was after Safe Harbor, so to speak, it was at 10 o'clock at night. So I don't think there was any control over what he played. Certainly it seemed to be free hand. So he played all the weird, obscure, independent stuff, which people would send him. He also, that's how I got into American punk, was partly through John Peel, and then partly, as I say, I dived headlong into that punk subculture. And the other thing I was doing was kind of tape trading, sending people cassettes of British stuff. And so again, by 79, 80, 81, I was kind of tape trading and doing all that kind of stuff. I was very much into that kind of DIY punk subculture, fanzines, and I played in a band and all that stuff. So I think, as I say, that was the kind of my genesis, was those kind of 2 tracks, which were somewhat separate, but very much connected. So I was this kind of, by 79, I was this very kind of political person that was also interested in these political ideas, and I guess in their subcultural ramifications and personifications, I guess, and how you put it into practice and all that. Again, I went on my first demonstration again. So as a 13-year-old, I went on an anti-nuclear demonstration. It was a march. Again, that's actually to the American nuclear base.
Wow.
And it was on that march that I bought my first anarchist newspaper. And I partly bought it, because it was an anarchist newspaper, but partly the paper seller, so to speak, the kids that were selling this newspaper were these 2 punk rockers. So they were already. So again, I say I kind of dived headlong both into the politics and the, whatever you want to call it, the subculture of punk and of anarchism. Of course, the more I discovered about anarchism, the more I thought the way punk rock articulated was somewhat naive and a bit embarrassing almost. But I'd say that kind of came later. When as a 15-year-old going to see Crass, when you're 15 and Crass were never that. Crass were huge because they all played all these small independent shows that were always, and never in a commercial venue. So it was always in like a VFW hall or, that kind of thing, a community center or a, church hall or whatever. So seeing Crass in a venue with, say, 300 other people, age 15, and we all looked the same, we're all leather jackets and, all that. And of course, we all knew all the words to every Crass song. So as a 15-year-old, I really thought that this was it. This was the fucking revolution, man. Mm. Shouting, fight war, not war. This was it. Again, as I got older, I realized that perhaps life may be a little more complicated than that, shall we say.
Yeah, totally.
But it was great. It was great growing up.
Yeah, it's always just a great catalyst, and singing along to those songs is just always catharsis. Even when I go to punk shows now, there's just sort of this thing like, yeah, they're still saying that we're all going to do something. It's been a long time, and that hasn't happened. But this is still great.
But I think part of the beauty of music is that music moves one, so to speak. Music can move you in ways which have got nothing to do with the words.
Totally.
Right? Music is an emotional thing. It's I don't know how, whatever. In the same way that music can move you with no words. The words are actually irrelevant, right? It's the music, it's the whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Everyone claims, largely correctly, I would argue, that jazz is political. Well, most jazz doesn't have any words. How can jazz be political? So obviously it's the music itself, but it's the cultural and political context, etc., etc. So I think music is a catalyst for change, absolutely.
Mm.
Whether or not the lyrics are naive or didactic, or I mean, how much subtlety and complexity can you put in a couple of verses in a chorus?
Totally.
Not a lot, really.
Yeah.
But I mean, that to me, that's not the role of music or the importance of music or of art or culture in that sense. Music can move us, it can inspire us, it can make us feel that we're not alone. It's a great soundtrack to the revolution.
Absolutely. No, totally on board 100%. It's just, just playing along with the whole like coming of age. Like, yeah, as you get older, you realize it's more complicated.
Well, as I say, I mean, I think
both things are true at the same time.
The politics of crass, I think, were basically militant middle-class liberalism.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm going to start being sophisticated in my political analysis, meaning Crass had no class analysis. In fact, they deliberately eschewed any class analysis. They were definitely militant. They were militant pacifists. They were militant, whatever, against war and against the bomb and all that. So I say it was kind of militant liberalism in the same way that liberals today can be correctly enraged about ICE. And so we'll say, let's abolish ICE. But they don't really want to abolish ICE, and they're not really against law enforcement, meaning they actually don't have a systemic or an actual view of how the world works. They're just reacting to certain things that they think are bad, and hence, again, for all the right reasons, I'm not denigrating people who are, up in arms about ICE. Like, no shit. But that politics, the politics of outrage, if you like, can only go and will only go so far. So anyway.
What does anarchism mean to you? Like, how would you define that to somebody?
Well, it partly depends who I'm defining it to. And I don't mean this to be obtuse, but just meaning, what's their level of understanding of politics?
Sure.
So, if you want to convey ideas, you have to have an understanding of who your audience is.
Right.
Because if that audience changes, then you're going to attempt to convey those ideas in a different manner. So I guess that's my smart arse response of not giving you a response, which of course is a very British thing to, respond to a question with another question.
No, that's fair.
But nevertheless, so to me, anarchism is a form of social and economic organization. So let's start with the positives, not the negatives. Anarchism against the state. Yes, it is. Anarchism against capitalism. But more importantly for me, anarchism is a form of organization. It's a form of social and economic organization. In terms of how we understand the world, because we have to understand the world to want to organize it in a different way, anarchists are like communists in that the anarchism which I subscribe to, which is 98% of anarchism, historically speaking, and today, the society we live in is capitalism, right? And capitalism is organized in certain ways, and that way is a so-called class society, right? And the capitalists, the ruling class, profit from extracting our labor. Everyone is forced to work, and people are not paid as much as their work is worth. And that extra worth, that profit, is what makes profits for everyone except us who have to labor, so to speak. So if we accept that that's all true, and again, I don't think most people would accept that we live under capitalism and that's how it works. So by that definition, then I believe in class struggle. So if we live under capitalism and if one thinks that capitalism is an inequitable society, there's too much, what's the current phrase? There's too much wealth inequality. So that wealth inequality, if we don't believe that wealth inequality will be lessened by those that have more just giving us more, well, if we vote for someone who will give us a little bit more of the pie. So as an anarchist, I believe that the only way to have better wealth inequality, better social equality or whatever, is by a radical change, a revolutionary change. That would mean living under an economic system that's not capitalism, a different form of economic distribution. So in that sense, of course, I'm anti-capitalist. But I say, to me, anarchism is this positive, how do we organize society differently than it is today? And I think that is a fundamental. And it's a struggle, which of course where the phrase class struggle comes from. If we don't think that our betters are going to give it to us, then we're going to have to take it. And that's going to involve a struggle. And again, there's a whole other argument over what are the ends and means of that, what forms will that struggle take, etc., etc. But if I was giving you if someone like yourself who's somewhat politically sophisticated, so what's my one sentence definition of anarchism? It would be, I've forgotten it already. I had it. It means that I'm a senile old bastard and I can't remember shit anymore. That's my definition of anarchism. God damn. Oh, yes, I remember it. Good. It's the self-determination of the working class. So if we believe in a class society and we believe that the majority of people that do the work, i.e. the working class, are the ones that are going to have to change it themselves, as opposed to have it given to us by our betters or our superiors on the class scale, then we're going to have to do it ourselves, hence the self-determination of the working class. That, to me, is anarchism.
Mm-hmm. So where does anarchism differentiate from socialism?
Well, socialism, it differentiates from socialism vastly, because socialism still believes in effect, a class society. So the socialism, if by socialism you mean the socialism of, say, Bernie Sanders or AOC or Mamdani and the new mayor of New York, if that's your definition of socialism.
Would you call them socialists?
They call themselves socialists.
Well, yeah. Well, that's fair. I mean, I would just say they're more like social democrats.
I agree with you. But that's the current definition of socialism, right? DSA,
sure. Okay.
They're Democratic Socialists of America. They call themselves socialists. So if you said, what's the difference between communism? I think, so I would say anarchism and, so one of the problems I have with socialism is socialism believes in the same structures. Social democracy still thinks that the current structures will deliver that better distribution of goods, of wealth, of whatever. It's going to be better, but they still basically believe in a class society. And, you know, that's just the way the world works. It's still the class society is the best way of distributing those goods and services. And we still believe in the state. We still believe in all the crap that comes with that. You know, we still believe in law enforcement. We still believe in the military. We still believe in the way the system works in general and the way the world works. We think it could be run better. And that running it better would benefit more of the Earth's population. Communism is fundamentally opposed to that, as is anarchism, because they want that revolutionary change of the way things work and the way things are run and organize, so to speak. Anarchists, I would argue, are communists. Marx said that Marx's famous dictum was each according to their. Fuck, I've forgotten that as well now. God damn it.
Each
according to their
ability and their need.
Exactly. Yeah. That basically, you give what you can and you take what you need, in effect, to paraphrase Marx, I guess. And that a communist society would be this free society where everything for everyone, right? Mm-hmm. Anarchists also believe that. The fundamental difference, I think, between a communist society and an anarchist society is how we get there. Since the way that historically communists and communist parties and organizations have always organized is on this, what's called the Leninist model, which comes after Lenin, and that's of seizing power. It's of the party, the political party, being the kind of brain of the working class, so to speak, and kind of directing us. So it's the party which has the received wisdom, presumably from the correct reading of the holy texts of Marx and Lenin and whatever, and it's the party that will do it all and will bring us communism eventually, because eventually the state will wither away. So it's that kind of ends and means. So it's how do we get to the communist society that has been the fundamental problem, or the fundamental difference, shall we say. Since anarchists don't believe in political parties, they don't believe in seizing state power, they don't believe in any of those supposedly interim steps which have happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting because it's just, and as you kind of pointed out, when we're getting into contemporary stuff, it's like these terms get reassessed and they get kind of redefined, and they get, because for me, it's hard to just like take any one tag, but like I've thought like, well, I feel like eco-socialist might be the clearest glass, but based on how you described a socialist, well, that ain't me. So it's
sure. And I think obviously I think ideas are really important. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, I've spent my whole life trying to disseminate ideas of various kinds. So I think ideas matter. If one agrees ideas matter, then we have to be able to define them.
Right.
However, I don't think that any set of ideas or practices are sacrosanct or are immutable or are the holy texts which have to be interpreted and followed correctly, so to speak. Quite the opposite. I mean, I have lots of criticisms, I have lots of debates, I have lots of problems with anarchist orthodoxy, shall we say. Mm. And as a kid and as an adult, a lot of what inspired me as I became more active politically, and also as I started to read actual political texts, as opposed to literature or whatever, when I started getting into it. And still, a lot of the folks that really inspired me or really made my head kind of turn. So to me, a lot of anarchism is just common sense. Mm. And so when I was a kid, as a teenager, reading the anarchist classics, reading Emma Goldman and reading Kropotkin, and even reading the contemporary anarchist writers, people like Stuart Christie or Colin Ward in the UK or Murray Bookchin, a lot of that was just me agreeing, yeah, no shit, of course we could organize our own lives better, and of course we don't need these hierarchies, and we don't need these political parties and these organizations telling us what to do and blah, blah, blah. And of course, there are a legion of practical examples of how people have always organized their lives in these ways, despite the machinations of the state and of law enforcement and of authority and blah, 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 blah. But for me as a kid, again, it was actually reading a lot of non-anarchists, which really kind of turned my head and really got me thinking about things. So I think probably the most important single writer, if I had to pick one, would be this Marxist historian called E.P. Thompson, whose magisterial work is called The Making of the English Working Class. And that book, as the title says, he's describing how class society came into being. This is in Britain in 1750 to kind of 1850. So it's during the Industrial Revolution. So the introduction of steam power, etc., and hence of the nascent capitalism and how that emerged in the UK, but more, or England, I guess it was England and Wales, and Scotland. But equally importantly, how the ordinary people who became workers, of course, in that capitalist sense, how they responded and how they organized. And it's not just the formation of class, but equally importantly for him, it's the formation of class consciousness. Because class is two things. Class is that kind of mechanistic sociological definition, meaning one's relation to the means of production. Either you're an owner or you're a, petty bourgeoisie or you're a worker. Okay. But I mean, that's the kind of just the sociological definition of where you are in the capitalist order. But more importantly, if anything is going to change, one needs class consciousness. One needs to know that the interests of oneself and one's fellow workers are different from those of the bosses. They are different from those of the managerial class, in Britain commonly known as the middle class, who serve as this kind of enforcer and the indoctrinators of the ruling class, of the owning class, shall we say. So it's that development of people see their interests as the same as their fellows, so to speak, and different from other classes. And it was a really seminal work. And
I wrote it down. I want to check it out.
It was also the first book. So Howard Zinn talks about much of that, again, much more well-known, deservedly so in America, People's History of the United States. So he's talking about history from below. So Howard Zinn's equally magisterial work came out, I believe, in 1980. The Making of the English Working Class came out in 1962. Again, not that it's a competition of who done it first, but just saying that E.P. Thompson was talking about the same thing, being the self-activity of the working class. How do people, so he was talking in those days about the Luddites and the weavers and the labourers who became the English, working class that were forced to go and work in the satanic mills, etc., of the Industrial Revolution. So it's reading people like E.P. Thompson really kind of got me thinking rather than just kind of nodding my head in agreement, if that makes sense. So a lot of the anarchist stuff to me was just kind of common sense, because it is common sense. Yeah, no shit, we don't need bosses and hierarchy to organize. But I think what a lot of Marxist writing has added layers of sophistication to that. And also the history of Marxist writing, again, whether I agree with all of their politics or not, Marxism or Marxists have taken a lot more all-encompassing view of life in society. So there's a lot more Marxists, for example, writing about art or culture or literature. It's not that anarchists have never done this. And in fact, often anarchists have been the proponents of this and actually done it themselves, and then they get written about and, written up and abused or not by the Marxist art critics. But anyway, if that makes sense. So, one of the things I appreciate about Marxism is it has that wider lens or that prism. It's a more totalistic way of looking at life in general. Whereas, anyway. But my point is that, for me personally and also politically, I want to take the good stuff in the world and I want to make it work and I want to apply it. And I don't care where that good stuff comes from. Nevertheless, as we said, one needs theoretical and practical frameworks and prisms and lenses through which one can analyze and act upon these things. So, like most of life, it's kind of complicated and messy.
Yeah.
But I think, again, I've just been kind of denigrating anarchism for the last 10 minutes, but I think one of the beauties of anarchism is that it has always been an evolving project. Part of the problem of Marxism is, again, it's kind of like all religions and all cults, it's the correct interpretation of the holy texts.
Right.
What is the Marxist view on art? What is the correct Marxist view on literature? What is the correct Marxist view on the political party or trade union consciousness or whatever the fuck? Do you know what I mean? It's like it's the correct, instead of the correct interpretation of the Bible or the Quran or the fucking Talmud, it's the correct interpretation of the holy texts of Marx and Engels and Lenin and Mao and Stalin and all that. Whereas anarchism has been much more about evolutionary progress, shall we say, which sounds kind of a weird term, but it's like, how do we put ideas into practice? So anarchism is always changing when those ideas butt up against reality. Mm-hmm. So the debates within anarchism are not about the correct interpretation. Typically, they're about how do we actually, they're practical. How do we put this into practice? This doesn't work. So if this doesn't work, or the situation has changed, if we're now in a society where most people don't work in factories and there are not these huge concentrations of labor, what does that mean then for example, organizing the working class? If the working class are not all in these large buildings that contain thousands, tens of thousands of workers, or they're not all in the mines, most of the working class is now, I don't know, in the service economy. What does that mean for organizing, for example? So, as I say, in anarchism's favor, it's always trying to move forward. It's not stuck in the correct interpretation of the holy text.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let's get up to PM Press then. So, kind of give me a little bit of the origin story there.
Well, the origin story is I'm a boring bastard that's done the same thing all of my life. So meaning, if you go back to when I was this early teenager, I say I was headlong in both politics and the kind of punk subculture and underground. And so that was, I was involved in tape trading, and those days it was all literally writing letters by hand and mailing them across the world. It was that whole DIY subculture. DIY, of course, means do it yourself, which is a terrible misnomer because you're not doing it yourself. You're actually doing it in concert with others. It's not a series of Ayn Rand supermen doing these things. I mean, even playing in a band, you're doing it with others, right?
Right.
It's not a series of solo, ultimate supermen that are doing this stuff. It's like this whole network of people working together.
Right.
Which again is one of the kind of symbiosis with anarchism, right? Is that punk is this kind of underground punk is this microcosm of different ways of organizing, right? Of different ways of producing media. In the case of the whole fanzine subculture, of different ways of organizing and releasing records, of different ways of organizing tours, of different ways of interacting with the world in that sense. So, again, I was a small part of that. And as a small part of that, I say my passion was always with ideas and literature. And so through punk rock, I was playing in a band from about 1980 onwards. So I'd say I was an active part of that subculture of organizing shows as well as going to shows. I never wrote a fanzine, but I did lots of interviews for fanzines and wrote for fanzines. And then it became obvious to me that, well, thanks for interviewing me and my band for your fanzine. Why don't you send me 10 copies of the fanzine when it comes out and I'll sell them at our gigs? So, so I was, an active part of that subculture. And as I became more active in the political subcultures that overlapped, with anarchism in particular, I just started. So, I started off selling fanzines and distributing fanzines, none of which were written by me, as well as, again, selling the cassettes band produced. Again, cassettes were a big thing in the early 80s. A lot of bands never released records, but they do like demo tapes, which were often, in the case of our band and many others, were actually recorded in a studio, but it was much cheaper and you could duplicate it yourselves, with your 2 tape decks. Anyway, so I was already involved, for want of a better term, in commerce. So as I became more political and as a kid I became interacted with more overtly political stuff, I then started distributing that as well. So as well as distributing fanzines, I was distributing political pamphlets and then books and magazines. And then I started publishing stuff as well. So AK Press started out, I say, with me distributing stuff out of my bedroom in Stirling. I know, age, whatever the fuck, 14, 15, 13. Yeah, maybe 13. Me selling stuff and distributing stuff. And then maybe in 81, so maybe I was 14, maybe or so, I went to a big gig in the UK, in London. I was actually on my way to visit my family in the Middle East. I was flying out of London. So I was in London. And I say, because I was already involved in this punk anarchist subculture, there was a big squat rock, big gig. There was this punk club called the Zigzag. It was not a punk club, a big commercial rock club called the Zigzag. And that had recently closed. So Crass and the Apostles and a bunch of other of the anarchist punk bands squatted the Zigzag, this club, and had this big, which became legendary, punk gig. I say, because I must have known about it, or how else would I have turned up there in London? I mean, I happened to be in London at the same time, fortunately, on my way out to the Middle East. But I knew about the gig, so I turned up at the gig. And so I say, anyone who was anyone, so to speak, was playing at it. It was the real kind of the creme de la creme of the anarchist punk underground. So Crass played, Conflict played, Dirt, Poison Girls, Zounds, The Mob, and a bunch of kind of smaller bands. So it's the real kind of the Subhumans, I think. I can't remember. Wow. It was anyone who was anyone played that. Almost anyone. I don't think Rudimentary Peni didn't play. But anyway, all the London bands were there and a bunch of other bands. And I was there with my little plastic bag full of fanzines because I was already doing this, right? So I was walking around harassing innocent concert goers saying, "Hey, mister, do you want to buy a fanzine?" Mm-hmm. In those days, the question was often, "What's a fanzine?" To which I say, "Look, it's a magazine. It's all your favourite bands. It's got Crass and the UK subs and all that. And it's only 5p. And anyway, at the back of the hall of this squatted venue was a big table full of literature. There's a bunch of these old dudes, or appeared old to me, and it transpires they're probably only 10 or 15 years older than me, but there was these weird old guys with big beards. And, back in 1981, having a beard was not a fashion statement that it is today. These were not hipsters. I thought there's a bunch of old fucking hippies or whatever with beards. Anyway, being the annoying little kid that I was, I went up to them and said, "Who are you? What are you doing?" Because I thought what they were doing was really cool. Not only did they have this massive spread of real literature, of books and pamphlets and all that, but they were sitting behind a table. And even at the age of 14 or whatever, I realized that that was a much better way of selling stuff. People came to you rather than me going around harassing everyone at the concert. So I peppered them with 1,000 questions. I was that typical annoying little brat. And it transpired that they were from a local independent radical bookstore called Houseman's, which still exists today. It's in King's Cross, which at the time was a very seedy, it's the kind of central London. So at the time, of course, it was the bad inner city. These days, of course, it's the super expensive, gentrified, yuppified. But anyway, the bookstore is still there because they managed to buy their building. Actually, their building was owned by Quakers, who had the good sense to buy the building probably 100 years before that. But anyway, so not only did they answer my questions, but then they told me about the bookstore. So then every school holiday, I would go down to London. And so every Easter and Christmas and summer and all that, I would go down to London and hang out at Houseman's bookstore. And not only would they have a bookstore, but they were also at the time involved in publishing and distributing literature. So they were doing everything that I'd ever fantasized about or even knew was possible. So I just hung out there and asked them a million annoying questions, and they were patient and kind enough to answer my questions and kind of mentor me. So the first pamphlets I published were kind of co-publications with some of the folks that were involved in Houseman's. They told me that, the basics of how this shit works, and the rest of it I just kind of made up as I went along. So to answer that origin story, what was the genesis of PM? So, I started AK Press as a little kid. At a certain point, AK Press became more than just me. So I think maybe that was in 1990 or something. By that point, I was living in Edinburgh. When I was 17, when I was old enough to leave high school, I moved to the nearest big city. There's only two big cities in Scotland. One is Glasgow on the west coast, one is Edinburgh on the east coast. So I just kind of picked Edinburgh. And I lived there for 10 years. So again, I say initially I was still doing AK Press from my bedroom in my mum's house in Stirling. I went to doing it from whatever bedroom I lived in the various apartments I lived in, shared apartments I lived in Edinburgh. And then at a certain point, it was kind of getting out of control, and it was more than one person could handle. And so I recruited some of my fellow political activists, people that I knew through political activism, that I also knew were kind of interested in literature. So I then set it up as a workers' co-op. I think there were 5 of us initially in Edinburgh. And at a certain point in 1994, by that point we were doing so much business in America that I managed to persuade my fellow collective members that we were doing so much work in America that it really made sense that someone should have to move to San Francisco and set up AK Press in San Francisco. And I would kind of take the short straw and do it. So in 1994, I buggered off to the Bay Area and set up AK there. And then in 2007, I guess, me and the minority faction at AK Press started doing PM Press. And I think we were then kicked out of AK Press a year later for doing PM Press. Mm. And the rest is history.
How did you, what was the adjustment going from Scotland to the US?
It was fine. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was really easy. So I first came to America in 1989, and I was touring. So I was touring with my punk band. I was playing in a punk band. I said it was part of this anarchist punk underground called Political Asylum. And I say we were active members of this, phenomenal punk underground. Meaning, and again, this is still in the days of phone calls, but largely letter writing. Mm-hmm. I don't think fax machines were even invented then. No. I don't think fax machines. Fax machines came in 1990. I think was when I bought my first fax machine, and that was a real game changer because that meant that you could send a letter in effect to America and get a reply the same day.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas previous to that, you send a letter, it would take 2 or 3 weeks to get there, and your reply would take 2 or 3 weeks. So you're talking a month to 6 weeks to get a reply. But nevertheless, us and a whole bunch of other people organized whole fucking world tours through that method of writing. Again, this is contacts that we had through tape trading, through, again, in my case, it was also through political activism, from, distributing books and all that. So anyway, in 89, I came to America with the band called Political Asylum. We did an American tour, but we arranged the tour to end up in San Francisco because we wanted to attend the Without Borders anarchist gathering, which we knew was happening in San Francisco in 89. So we arranged this, it was like 3-week tour or something, that ended up, as I say, in San Francisco at the end of the tour. So we could both play at, when we did 2 or 3 gigs as part of the anarchist gathering, it was kind of like a week-long affair. But also we wanted to attend as civilians, so to speak. We wanted to go to the workshops and all that because we're anarchists. So that was my first time in America. So that was fucking weird, right? Because all we know in Britain at the time is American culture. So one of the first things, the first day I landed, I walked into a corner store or whatever. We flew into Boulder, Colorado, because we were touring with this American band called Dead Silence. Mm-hmm. So we were obviously using their gear and all that. Of course, we came over as tourists, and we wouldn't say we're in a band or nothing. So we just came over with, our bassist and guitarist brought their guitars. And I think, That was it. And then we shared their gear and all that. Anyway, so the first thing I did is I went to a corner store and I wanted to buy a Twinkie because I was a big fan of the Dickies. And the Dickies, who of course I now understand are horrible right-wing idiots, but at the time, I mean, the music's still great. But anyway, if folks remember the We Are the World, the Roar cassette that the Dickies did, the Dickies kept going on about how the payment for the band is going to be in Twinkies. Twinkies for the band. So I walked into a corner store and said, oh, can I have a Twinkie, please? And they pointed me to where the Twinkies were. And of course, I looked at the ingredients and being a vegan, put it back. So I've still never had a Twinkie. It's full of beef fat and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so it was a weird culture shock. You know, I mean, so what we knew of America was from movies, from music, from reading Maximum Rock and Roll, you know, whatever. But obviously, the reality is somewhat different. Mm-hmm. But it was interesting. And of course, no one could understand a word we said because I have lost about 90% of my Scottish accent. But at the time, like, no one could understand a word we said. Everyone thought we were, I love your voice. I go, great, but where's the post office? I love your voice, would be the response. So we were stuck in this weird kind of like tape loop where people loved us but couldn't understand a word we said. You guys are from Scotland. There'd be two responses. One would be, all right, you're from Scotland. You'll know my cousin Bob then. Or, you guys are from Scotland, England. So it's that kind of, you know, that kind of dealing with Americans. But when I say why it was easy for me is because I'd spent many years prior to that, I had this large network, both through punk rock and politics. Do you know what I mean? We were distributing, we were exporting British literature to America and equally importing American stuff into the UK, etc., etc. And then musically. So I had this whole network of friends, of comrades, of colleagues. So me wanting to come to America, I say that was really easy because I could have the same lifestyle, for want of a better term, be involved in the same stuff, have the same job, literally, still be involved in the countercultural kind of music scene, because these were all my, you know, as I say, I already knew, you know, I knew that world intimately. Well, not intimately, but you see what I'm saying? So it was entirely familiar to me. In those days as well, it was a lot easier to get into America legally, shall we say. But I'm now legal, honest. And in those days, being Arab was not evil. This was long before 9/11. I moved to America in 94. So the fact that I'm Lebanese wasn't a problem for the Americans. In fact, Arabs were in those days were considered to be white. And of course, they're no longer considered to be white. So it wasn't a problem, shall we say. Whereas if it would have been a lot more difficult if I was, say, Latino or, you know, whatever, back in those days. So it was easy to move in the 90s. And I just carried on, as I say, doing what I've always done, which is kind of disseminating ideas and liking punk rock.
So last question, and it's a big, it's going to be somewhat broad, so take it in whichever direction you want. I am curious, what's your kind of assessment on what is going on contemporarily right now in the United States, and where do you get your hope from, if you have any?
Well, I think what's going on in the United States is really miserable and depressing. I mean, that's my take. It's much more miserable and depressing because it's actually nothing new. It's somewhat more spectacular, but in my mind, and not just in my mind, I think it can be objectively proven time and time again that there is literally less than a dime's worth of difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. We're talking about the same system. So let's take the two spectacular things that are going on at the moment. One is the current genocide in Palestine was started and enforced by the Democrats. And the so-called liberal media are 1,000,000% behind it. Mm-hmm. In fact, they still are. They're still defending it. And the same is true of all American domestic and foreign policy from day one. Right? Well, what's also going on recently? America's about to invade or has invaded or has been doing bad things to Venezuela. America's been doing bad things to Latin America for the last fucking, ever since the creation of America, ever since America fucking stole, 2/3 of Mexico and decided it was actually going to be called Texas and California and New Mexico and all that. Do you know what I mean? It's like nothing has actually changed. And there is complete unanimity towards, call it what you want, this system. Right? And the rhetoric changes, and the Democrats or the liberals, have better rhetoric. The person that still holds the American record in the 21st century for deporting people is still Obama, not Trump. And indeed, Biden deported more people than Trump can ever achieve. I say, so again, to take this ICE thing, it's more of the same old shit. Certain Democratic lawmakers are up in arms about it. They're not going to change it. You're not going to have any Democratic lawmaker voting against law enforcement. The George Floyd uprising, Black Lives Matter before that, all happened under, or partially under, Democratic presidents. What was Biden's response to the George Floyd uprising? It wasn't defund the police. It was increased police spending by 25%. So there's a couple of Democratic lawmakers at the moment. What are they suggesting? That not to abolish ICE. They're suggesting that ICE should only be allowed to operate on the borders.
I thought you were going to say better training. That's the other one that they.
Well, they want better training, and but I'm saying it's the same old shit. The difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is the Republicans actually say what they mean. Mm. I mean, Trump is a deranged lunatic, so who knows what he actually means, but he's honest in what he says. So is Rubio at the moment. How many times have been attempted coups in Venezuela over the last 20 years? And for the last 20 years, there's been this insane economic blockade of Venezuela, irrespective of, I say, the nature of the government. So on these major things, and let's take another one. There was the shutdown recently, right? And the Democrats were all against the shutdown, and they really wanted to save Medicaid. And then apparently they didn't. And they just said, actually, we'll vote to actually to not have the shutdown anymore. And there's no problem. And, Medicaid's not being restored. Everyone's now lost their health care. So tell me, what's the difference except in rhetoric? All right, so that's the bad news. These people are all fucking scum. They're all the enemy. Now, is Mamdani different? I hope so. Again, Mamdani has fantastic socialist rhetoric. He quoting Eugene V. Debs and all that. And I was super excited when Mamdani won. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing. I mean, as an anarchist, I think Medicaid is really important. Mm-hmm. I'm not this weirdo. I say, to me, it's not about theory. It's not I'm against the state, so I'm against Medicaid. I'm not against ICE or law enforcement because I'm against the state. I'm against it because they're fucking evil, right, and they serve no purpose in society. In the current society we live in, Medicaid serves a really good purpose. Mm-hmm. I'm for Medicaid. If I could vote, I'm not allowed to vote because I'm not an American. If I could vote, I would vote for Medicaid. Absolutely. The trouble is, no one is actually going to implement Medicaid, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican. So that's the problem I have with the system. and the belief in the system, it doesn't work. It objectively doesn't work. And it's never worked for the majority of people. That's the bad news, all right? Or that's the miserable shit. And it's definitely miserable. I mean, my situation is much worse than it was, probably, than it was, a year ago under Biden. But not really. Because the Democrats don't like anarchists, and the Democrats deport lots of people, and the Democrats don't like Antifa and anti-fascists any more than the Republicans do. Do you know what I mean? It's like, there's literally no difference. What gives me hope? Well, in one sense, what gives me hope, again, is looking at history. Because history shows that, ordinary people coming together. I say E.P. Thompson, in those days, in the 1780 in Britain, it was called combinations. It was long before trade unions were ever invented. It's called a combination of workers, right? People coming together. Let's call it collectively. So throughout history, people collectively have done incredible things against all the odds. Who would have thought that, all of the progress that's happened in the last 200 years would have happened? And in fact, all the progress that happened in the last 200 years has happened not because of the Democrats or our elders or betters giving it to us, it's because it was fought for. Mm-hmm. And occasionally they had to concede it. Right? I mean, people now the fucking Social Democrats now hearken back to, what's it called, in the 30s?
FDR.
And, FDR went to the ruling class and said, listen, guys, if we don't give them lots, there's going to be a fucking revolution.
Yeah. And
still, it was touch and go. It was only a tiny majority of the ruling class were willing to even give those concessions. The 90% on the tax on the wealthy, that kind of thing. 48% of them said, no fucking way. Bring it on. But I said, this happens because of, the GI Bill only happened after the Second World War because they were really afraid that most reforms happen after wars. Because most people that fight wars think they're fighting for something better. Right? So the so-called welfare state that Britain had, again, was given to them, to the Brits, because all these troops came home and they were about to fucking have a revolution. And so they were forced to, not only did they vote out Winston fucking Churchill, the supposedly great hero of the war leader, but there was mass squatting in Britain because all these troops came home and there was nowhere for them to live. So literally hundreds of thousands of families were squatting in the UK in 1945. So the welfare state, these reforms, you get free socialised housing, you get free education, you get free medicine, were given in the same way as FDR did, because otherwise there'd been a fucking revolution in Britain. Meaning, that's what causes change, is people coming together collectively and fighting for it. So that gives me hope. The other thing is, I say I don't believe in hope, because hope's kind of irrelevant. You can hope for whatever you want. We might wake up tomorrow lucky, or we might not. Who gives a fuck? Change only happens when you get organised and you make it happen. Right? That's my understanding of history. Not because you hope for it to happen. Sure. You actually fucking do it. So it's, so what is my response to the fucking calamities that are currently befalling us? We have to carry on doing the work. We only have two choices, right? We can either carry on fighting, carry on doing the work, carry on collectively organising, or not. That's our choices. And if we're not, then the vast majority of us will collectively carry on getting fucked. That's pretty self-evident to me.
No, I actually think that's a pretty hopeful take, to be honest.
I want a better world.
Yeah.
I want a better world for me, personally. I want a better world for my family, but I want a better world for everyone. Mm-hmm. But I also understand that better world can only happen if I organise with other folks to do it. So it's, again, that's the common sense to me of anarchism. That's not fucking magic, and it's not hope, and it's not belief. It's actually either we do it or we don't.
Please plug anything you would like to plug here in closing.
Well, obviously, my day job is important to me. not just because it makes me feel that I'm contributing something minor to making the world a better place, but also because it, pays my mortgage and feeds my kids. But so I would encourage anyone interested to check out pmpress.org. And I guess I should do the other wee plug is that the other thing I would say, again, it's nothing to do with hope, and it's about people doing organising. One of the most important things when people have actually had victories is creating institutions and creating viable structures, right? The organising works, it's over the long term. I mean, shit happens all the time, right? People go on strike or there's whatever. George Floyd happened out of fucking nowhere. We didn't create it. It created because there was yet another daily brutal police killing of another person, which happens every fucking day in America. More than every day. I think it's like, 500 or 600 a year. So, 1.5 times a day it happens every fucking day in America. But, so you can't tell what the spark is going to be, right? The George Floyd uprising, rebellion, call it what you want, was incredible. It's the biggest mobilization ever in American history. There was more people on the streets consistently for months than there ever was during civil rights in America in the 50s, during the anti-Vietnam War stuff in the 60s. The stuff that's heralded as these big stuff that happened in American history. George Floyd dwarfed it all. But at the end of it, what did we, the rest of us, come out of it? Well, Biden, doubled the police budget and probably they're now killing, 3 people a day. And, Trump then, with, the connivance of everyone else. I mean, all the fucking Democrats voted for it, remember? For the ICE to, increase their budgets and all that, deport more people. So, where am I going with this? So we were left with nothing. We were left with it's worse than before. The positive change that has happened is because people have organised over a long period of time, and part of the organisation is building institutions, right? And it's having that institutional memory. It's having that space where you can meet. A lot of the civil rights organising was done out of the black churches, Martin Luther King, etc., etc. They had those institutions in place, right? I mentioned Houseman's, that they're still going, almost 50 years after I bumped into them. That bookshop is still there in the middle of fucking gentrified central London. Why? Because the Quakers had the good sense to buy the building. Again, probably 100 years ago. And hence they couldn't be gentrified out of central London. So it's the importance of actually building institutions. Civil rights, as we all know, what didn't happen because Rosa Parks decided her fucking feet were tired and sat on the bus. Rosa Parks was a long-time organizer, and she did that deliberately as part of the strategy of kicking off the Montgomery bus boycotts. So it's organising, it's long-term, it's planning, which is a long way of me plugging. PM Press are in the process of trying to buy our warehouse. So it's our small way of trying to build that institution, that ecology, that fabric of alternative ways of doing things. In our case, of the dissemination of ideas, providing a place where people can actually interact with those ideas. So the other thing I'd say is check out our exclusive, stylish fundraiser merchandise, which you can find at pmpress.org, and also there's a GoFundMe going as well. We've paid off about half of our mortgage, about $250,000, and we need to raise another $250,000 to pay off the rest of the mortgage. So those of you with deep pockets, we'd love it.
Well, Ramsey, thanks so much for what you do. I've been, reading PM Press publications for a long time now. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for doing this show.
Really, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Ron, I know you've been doing it for a long time too. Thank you for your work, and thank you for having me on. Appreciate it very much.
That was Ramsey Kanaan. That is quite a remarkable story. Please, if you have not already, chances are you already have, but if you haven't, check out PM Press, pmpress.org. Check out that catalog. buy something, check out their GoFundMe. You get it. They are doing the Lord's work big time. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxon. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Please do make sure you're subscribed, especially if you get this show on YouTube. They are always messing with the uploads because YouTube just recently started carrying audio podcasts. It used to be through Google Podcasts, and that closed and went to YouTube, which has been kind of difficult. Sometimes these uploads go to private, and then I have to re-edit it. Anyway, it's just please make sure you're subscribed. Try to get the content out to you. You know how it goes. And if you want to support the show on the sustainability end, best way to do it, become a patron. Patreon.com/RobLacone. For a give what you can level, you don't have to worry about any of the stuff I just described because you get the 1,000 episodes before they're released to the public. I drop all of them on Patreon before they're released anywhere else. We do a lot of cool Zoom hangs, and I'm going to be doing some patron-only shows. I'm actually going to be making an announcement about that next week. So patreon.com/RobLacone makes a great gift, makes a great addition to your new year. You get it. All right, 123, which is, that's what 23 is my lucky number. And now we're at 123 as time keeps on marching by. Catch you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1,000 is doing for me, and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1,000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1,000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.